Thank you, Ian. Really brought that passage to life for us this morning. Ian on the chat earlier talked about God's roadmap for us. I thought it was a really helpful little picture. Obviously, we've heard the government's roadmap for the country recently. And God has a roadmap for your life. And I don't think it's too much of a political statement to say that that roadmap is a lot better than the government's roadmap for us. In fact, it's perfect for you. And this series that we're in at the moment, where we're trying to discern and remind ourselves of, or learn for the first time, our God-given shape, is a means by which we can be helped to find the right journey for us in our own lives. And that doesn't matter if you're 3 or 93. There's still, in all the days that you have, there's still opportunity for God to lead us in the way that he wants us to go, on the roadmap that he has for us, that fits our God-given shape. That's our spiritual gifts, our heart, our ability. And today we're looking at our personality, the way God has wired us up. Now, my mum watches this live stream each week. Good morning, Mum. Nice to see you. Well, nice to not to see you, but nice to know that you're watching. And we have a running joke at times, my mum, where she likes to remind me that she bore me. That's the phrase that she uses. So it's nice for me to have the chance to bore her every week now on a Sunday. And last Sunday, when I got back from our live stream, I had a message from her on my phone. And it said this: "One thing I've noticed since you settled at Dereham Baptist Church, you have been freed to be yourself." My reply to that was, that might be considered a bad thing. Her reply was, not by your mother. And I replied finally, it's very much true though. It's so precious to be accepted and loved for who I am. And in our continuing conversation, she was very grateful to the church, and so am I, very grateful to be accepted for the person that I am. In a previous role that I had, the expectations were put on me to be a certain type of person and behave in particular ways. And in that role, I had to close off parts of my personality because I was at risk of upsetting people or causing trouble if I allowed those parts of my personality to come out. And so here, in these days, I'm free to be who God made me to be. I just feel sorry for the rest of you, really, but you'll have to just put up with it for now. And it's particularly interesting because of a conversation I had with my tutor at Bible College. When I was called to my first role as a church leader, it was before I'd finished my final year, and the idea of God wanting me to be a minister seemed pretty outrageous to me. And so I went to see my tutor and I asked her this question: who do I need to become if I'm going to be able to be a minister? This sense that somehow I needed to be a certain type of person to be a minister. And my very wise tutor asked me this question: who is God calling to be the minister? And the answer to that was me. And so she said, so be you. And it was hard for me to believe that would be okay, that God could really allow me to be me with all the parts of my personality and still be a minister. And yet God has enabled that to happen. And so as we think about the P of our shape, the personality, it's really about being who God created us to be. God has given you a unique personality. You are not the same as anyone else. And I've met most of you, and I can absolutely confirm that that is indeed the case. God has given you a particular combination of characteristics that make you you. They impact how you think, how you feel, and how you behave. And they're revealed in our lives in both positive and negative ways. They're displayed in our attitudes, in our moods, in our idiosyncrasies, in the way that we relate to one another. And they're modified throughout our lives. But they all go back to the foundation of the distinctive God-given character that we had when we were born. that he knit together. Psalm 139, 13 to 14. For you created my inmost being. The real me, not just the bones and the skin and the blood and those things. My inmost being. And you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. God has done wonderful work in creating you. And it's important that you know that full well. I remember a song when I was a kid that we used to sing regularly. It was called If I Were a Butterfly. And even as it came into my mind when I was preparing this, I remembered the line about the fuzzy wuzzy bear with the fuzzy wuzzy hair. Isn't it funny what things stick in your minds from your youth? But I also remembered the line at the end of the chorus. It says this, and I just thank you, Father, for making me me. It's an important place that we're able to get to, where we know the good and bad about ourselves. We know those bits of our personality that we wish weren't quite like that, but yet we can come to God and say, thank you for making me the way that you made me. To not be in conflict with God about how he designed us. He is the potter and we are the clay. And it's also important that we understand who we are. And the Romans 12 passage helps us to think about that. Verse 3 talks about thinking of ourselves with sober judgment. Literally, that word in the Greek means to be of sound mind. We need a sound understanding of who we are. And the verse goes on to say, in accordance with the faith God has given us. In other words, with direct reference to God's ongoing work in us, recognizing his presence as part of who we are and his work in creating us, in designing us, and in now modifying our personality as we learn from him and as we grow. And verse 4 talks about us not all having the same function. We're all different and we're all unique, but we're all functional. Notice that. We don't have the same function, but we all have a function. We're all important, and the way God has made us is important for the church, for each one of us. And verse 5, we, though many, form one body. So all these diverse, dispersed, different personalities come together as a single entity under Christ. It's an amazing thing that God does there as a church community, to come together as one body with all our differences. Each member, it then says, belongs to all the others. I love this phrase. Each member belongs to all the others. There's a sense here that our personality is given to the whole body for its benefit. That actually who God's made me to be, I can give to the wider congregation to share with and to have an impact. So your God-given personality, in tandem with his love, grace, and mercy that is at work in you by his Holy Spirit, and so that more and more, day by day, we become the best me, I become the best me that I can be. Not somebody else over here, not trying to be somebody else, but trying to be the best me. A sound understanding of who I am and a firm recognition that I am wonderfully made. And that's true for you too. So that you too can be free to be who God made you to be. And that, of course, is true of everybody else too. Part of this personality thinking is freeing others to be who God made them to be, as you as a congregation have done with me and with Dave too. Dave, again, we were talking this week, another different personality, but again, loved and accepted for who he is, and that's a precious thing. And in any church, including this one, there are many different characters, and celebrating and utilizing our different personalities as part of this one body is a precious thing. What we're looking for is unity, but not uniformity. To really be who we've been made to be, but be united with others who are different to us. And so as part of this, I want to offer you the opportunity to take a personality assessment if you would like to. Many of you may have done this many times and may not feel you need to, but perhaps it's an opportunity just to be reminded. So we've put a link in the email this morning to a quick, short one that doesn't take very long, and a longer one if you want to go a bit deeper into that. But do feel free, and I encourage you to give that a go and see what comes out, see what you might learn from that about how God has wired you up. This is not about labeling or kind of putting you in a box, but it's just a few pointers to help us get a better understanding of how God wired us up. And in the next part of the passage from verses 6 to 8, Paul goes on to write about gifts. We looked at these under the S of spiritual gifts, and they were all part of the spiritual gift assessment. And your personality doesn't impact what your gifts are or what your abilities are. Both of those are also God-given. What your personality impacts is the manner in which you carry out your gifts and abilities. God hasn't designed you randomly with a bunch of different things. He's partnered your gifts and abilities with your personality in the way that he hasn't with anybody else in the world. God calls us to express our gifts and abilities through our personalities, not separated from them. So just a couple of examples. One of the gifts listed here is prophesying. Prophesying is about sharing with others something that God has put on your heart, that you believe God has said to you. Now, you do that through your personality. For some, that might mean coming out to the front of church and reading or sharing something whenever we are allowed back in the building. For others, it might be just as part of a smaller group of people. For some, it might be in a one-to-one conversation with someone where you share something you think God is saying to them. For others, it might just be to write a card with a verse in or a word for somebody. That's the same gift, the gift of prophecy, but it's displayed through our different personalities. One more example. The last one on the list here is show mercy. Showing mercy is about having compassion for and taking action on behalf of those who are in need. But it happens through our personality. Perhaps for some that involves making a living working for a charity who does this. Maybe for others it's being a trustee or a volunteer of such a charity. Perhaps for some it's just coming alongside people you know who are in need. For others it might be to donate, to give money to people and places that are doing this work. For others, it might be just to respond to individual circumstances as you walk past a homeless person in the street, for example. For each of us, that gift of showing mercy is expressed through our unique personality. So you have a God-given personality with which you can express your God-given gifts and abilities. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't sometimes call us to step out of our comfort zone. Sometimes we'll find ourselves in a moment where we feel God is stretching us and developing us and asking us maybe to do something that's a bit outside of what we would normally do. And sometimes he does that. And that's a great way that we can grow and develop because he's still transforming us to be more like Jesus. As part of this whole process, the phrase that I've always found really helpful is this, that we're becoming more and more who Jesus would be if he was you. You become more and more who Jesus would be if he was you, still with your personality as it is, being grown and developed and changed, but the real you, but the best you there is as Jesus does that work in your heart. Dave's now going to come and continue with the next part of the passage in Romans 12. Thanks, Dave.
I was just thinking about what you were saying, Nigel, about the, God calling us to step out of our comfort zones. And we often, don't we? We sit in, our personalities cause us to sit in a particular place of comfort when it comes to a whole variety of things. And they're a particular place of comfort that I like to sit in. I'm naturally an introvert and I'm quite shy. and don't like the idea of talking in front of groups of people, yet I find myself doing an awful lot these days. Well, obviously, I'm just talking to a camera at the moment, but, and I do sometimes think, God, can't I just be a little bit more comfortable? But actually, there's a really significant thing about this in terms of obedience, isn't there? It's about laying ourselves before God, who we are, our personalities, our gifts, our heart, and just giving it all to Him anyway. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that shortly. So we're going to be looking at verses 9 to 13 now from Romans 12. And in my Bible, it has a heading. That heading isn't there in the original Greek, it's just put in there for our benefit. And that heading is Love in Action. It's kind of a brief list of rules or commands, and it's kind of, this is the form that they're written in. They don't have this prerequisite of if you feel like it in front of them. Imagine that. So, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. If you feel like it, be devoted to one another in love. No, it doesn't have that. It's a command. Paul is writing this to the church in Rome, saying, and he's writing it to us as well, be devoted to one another in love. And so, we need to... it doesn't have that prerequisite in front, and we are expected to do this stuff no matter what our personality is. So verse 11, for example, says, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervour serving the Lord. Now, this could be one of those commands that we think we can't do just because of how we view it. It sounds like something an outgoing person would do better than me at. Spiritual fervour, for me that sounds someone full of energy and, like the person in the worship service who's dancing around. That can look like spiritual fervour, can't it? But you see, you might have noticed that Nigel and I are quite different in terms of our personality. But that doesn't mean that I am less passionate about Jesus than him, nor the other way around. See, spiritual fervour is displayed externally in different ways according to our personality. So you may get someone who prays out loud readily, and someone else who loves solitude and silence. And different personalities would have a preference as to which of those two they would prefer. But actually it's good to be able to do both. And so sometimes we use our personalities as an excuse as well, not to engage with some of this stuff, some of these rules or commands that we read here, and sometimes some things in the wider context of the Bible, because it seems that like we don't fit that description. And we can also make excuses for each other. So imagine you come into church and you say hi to someone, but they completely blank you. It's obvious they've seen you, but they choose to ignore you. And later on, they do the same thing again. And so you decide to comment to someone. You say, oh, I said hi to Olga, and she completely ignored me. And this person's response is, oh, that's just the way she is. And so now it seems okay for Olga to be consistently rude as part of who she is. But that is not what personality is. It's not what it's about, because there is a difference between behaviour and personality. You see, we are to love one another, bless those who give us a hard time, love the Lord with everything that we are, and recognise that as we serve one another, we are serving Jesus. But I do it as Dave, Nigel does it as Nigel, and you do it as who you are, following the teachings of God's word and loving without making excuses. You see, none of us have a leg to stand on before God anyway. See, apart from what Jesus has done for us. So we are to follow Scripture, whatever type of personality we are, in the way that best fits who we are, like Nigel was saying. See, in verse 12, when it talks about being joyful in hope, and it can look really different according to your personality. It doesn't mean that joyful hope is not present if someone isn't showing it externally. And it also doesn't mean that someone is exaggerating it if they are absolutely jubilant. It just means it's expressed differently, yet is present for every personality type. So what do we do with this stuff? Where does it leave us? Well, it actually takes us right back to the beginning of this chapter, the first 2 verses in Romans 12. I'll just reread them. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So like I said at the beginning, we submit ourselves to God, whoever we are and whatever we're like. We lay ourselves before him and subject ourselves to his grace and mercy, if we dare. What about you? Do you know Jesus? Do you know the one who's calling you to lay before him? The one who wants to transform your heart and mind? Do you know him? You can, you can find him today. You can turn to him. Have you given your life to him? You see, we offer ourselves to him in a way that fits with who we are. There's a little word in the end of verse 1, which we often overlook, and it's the word your. This is your true and proper worship. It's yours. Who you are, how you lay that before God is your true and proper worship. Have you ever been in a worship service or at a conference where some people are dancing and jumping around or others are sitting quietly? You see, one act is not more worshipful than the other. But this is about our lives and not a worship session. So have a think about how you worship God as you and not as someone else, your true and proper worship. What does worship look like in your everyday life to God? Have a think about that. Do not conform to a worldly pattern. You don't have to worship like someone else. Be free, be you, be transformed, so that we can know his good, pleasing and perfect will. When Nigel and I were putting this together and chatting about it a few days ago, he found this quote. I don't remember who said it though, but it goes like this. The more I give God control, the more like the real me I become, because he created me. The more I give God control, the more like the real me I become, because he created me. So again, it comes down to recognizing that we're different and being okay with that. I mean, you might say, well, that's obvious. But sometimes we're not okay with it, are we? But no matter how God made us, we're able to be obedient to him through the filter that is our personality. And what that looks like can be different. But a heart full of spiritual fervour is what God is after. Consider how different the disciples were. I'm not going to go into that now, but when you have a read of the Gospels, think about how different they are in their personalities. So again, like the other aspects of our God-given shape, it is about submitting them to him, finding them, discovering them for ourselves, and then laying them all before God. So that no matter what we are like, we are choosing to go his way anyway. After our next song, we'll be going into communion, and Ian will be leading us in that. But now we have a slightly modern take on a wonderful old hymn, which goes like this. When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my riches gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. So let's come before our glorious God now and surrender our personalities, surrender everything that we are to him as we sing.